The weather was clear. A fine thick rain had fallen all the morning, but now it had just cleared off. The roofs and the flagstones and harnesses and the metal work of the carriages glittered in the May sunshine. It was 3 o'clock, the liveliest time in the streets. Sitting in the corner of the comfortable calash, which swung easily on its elastic springs as it rolled swiftly along, drawn by a pair of greys, Anna, soothed by the monotonous rumble of the wheels, and the hurrying impressions that she received in the fresh, pure air, reviewed the events of the past few days, and her situation seemed entirely different from what it had been at home. Now, the idea of death did not frighten her so much, and death itself did not seem to her so inevitable. Now she blamed herself for the humiliation to which she had stooped. I begged him to forgive me. I bent before him. I accused myself. Why did I? Can't I live without him? And, leaving this question unanswered, she began to read the signboards mechanically. Contre escalade. Zubnoy Vrach. Yes, I will tell Dolly all about it. She does not love Vronsky. It will be hard, shameful, but I will confess everything. She loves me. I will follow her advice. I will not allow him to treat me like a child. Filopov, Kalachki. They say they send those loaves as far as Petersburg. The water at Moscow is so good. Ah, the wells of Muitischensky. And she remembered how long, long ago, when she was 17, she had gone with her aunt to the monastery of Tryotsa. They traveled with horses in those days. Was it really I, with the red hands? How many things which seemed then beautiful and unattainable are worthless to me now. What I was then is past forever beyond recall, and ages could not bring me back. Would I have believed then that I could have fallen into such debasement? How proud and self-satisfied he will be when he reads my note. But I will tell him. How disagreeable this paint smells. Why are they always painting and building? Modui I Uberi, a fashionable dressmaker, she read. A man bowed to her. It was Anushka's husband. Our parasites, as Vronsky says. Ours. Why ours? Ah, if one could tear out the past by the roots. But that's impossible. One can only avoid thinking about it. And I do that. And yet, here she recalled her past with Alexey Alexandrovitch, and how she had driven him out of her memory. Dolly will think that I am leaving the second husband, and that I am, therefore, really bad. Do I want to be good? I cannot. And she felt the tears coming. And, seeing two happy young girls going by, she fell to wondering why they were smiling at each other. Probably about love. They don't know how sad and wretched it is. The boulevards and the children. There are 3 little boys playing horse. Serosa, my little Serosa. I shall lose all. I shall never have him again. Well, if he does not come back, all is indeed lost. Perhaps he missed the train and has already reached home. Do I wish to humiliate myself still more? She said, reproaching herself for her weakness. No, I am going to Dolly's. I shall say to her, I am unhappy. I am suffering. I deserve it, but I am so unhappy. Help me. Oh, these horses, this calash. How I hate to use them. They are his. I will never see them again. While thinking over what she should say to Dolly and deliberately torturing her heart, she reached the house and went up the steps. Is there anyone here? She asked in the anteroom. Katerina Alexandrovna Levina, answered the servant. Kitty. The same Kitty with whom Vronsky was once in love, thought Anna. And he thinks of her with love, and is sorry that he did not marry her. And he thinks of me with hate, and is sorry that he ever met me. When Anna arrived, the 2 sisters were talking over the subject of feeding babies. Dolly went alone to the drawing-room to receive the guests that had come to disturb their conversation. You haven't gone away yet. I was just going to your house, said Dolly. I have a letter from Stiva today. We had a dispatch, answered Anna, glancing round to see if Kitty was coming. He writes that he does not understand what Alexey Alexandrovitch requires, but that he will not come away till he has a definite answer. I thought you had company. May I read the letter?" "Yes. Kitty," said Dolly, confused. "She is in the nursery. You know she has been very ill." "I heard so. May I read the letter?" "Certainly. I'll go and get it. Alexey Alexandrovitch does not refuse. On the contrary, Stiva is quite hopeful," said Dolly, stopping at the door. "I neither hope nor want anything," said Anna. "Does Kitty think it humiliating to meet me?" thought Anna when she was left alone. "Perhaps she is right. But she who once loved Vronsky has no right to thrust it in my face, even if she is right. I know that a virtuous woman cannot receive me in my present position. I have given up everything for him, and this is my reward. Oh, how I hate him! Why did I come here? I am more wretched here than at home." She heard the voices of the two sisters in an adjoining room. "And what am I to say to Dolly? Delight Kitty with the spectacle of my misery? Submit to her condescension? Never! Even Dolly wouldn't understand. I will not say anything to her. All I should want to see Kitty for would be to show her that I am indifferent, that I scorn every one and everything." Dolly came in with the letter. Anna silently looked it through and returned it. "I knew all that," said she, "but it doesn't interest me at all." "Now, why not? I have good hopes," said Dolly, looking critically at Anna. She had never seen her in such a strange state of irritation. "When do you go away?" Anna half closed her eyes, and looked before her without answering. "Is Kitty afraid of me?" she asked after a moment, glancing toward the door with heightened color. "Oh, what nonsense! She is nursing the baby. It does not go very well yet. I have been giving her some advice. She will be delighted, and is coming directly," answered Dolly, awkwardly, not knowing how to tell a fib. "Oh, there she is now." When Kitty heard that Anna was there, she had not wished to appear, but Dolly had persuaded her. Controlling her repugnance, she went to the parlor, and, blushing as she approached Anna, she held out her hand. "I am very glad," she said in a trembling voice. Kitty was confused by the struggle between her dislike of this wicked woman and her desire to be polite to her, but, as soon as she saw Anna's beautiful, attractive face, all her unfriendliness vanished. "I should not have been surprised if you had refused to see me. I am used to everything," said Anna. "You have been very ill. Yes, you have changed." Kitty felt that Anna looked at her with dislike, and she attributed her unfriendliness to the awkward position in which she stood in regard to herself, having once been her special favorite. Her heart was filled with compassion. They talked of Kitty's illness, about her baby, and of Stiva, but evidently nothing interested Anna. "I came to bid you good-bye," she said to Dolly, as she rose. "When do you go?" But without answering her, Anna turned to Kitty. "Well, I am very glad to have seen you again," said she with a smile. "I have heard so much about you from everyone, and especially from your husband. He came to see me, and I liked him very much," she added with a wicked emphasis. "Where is he?" "He has gone to the country," answered Kitty, blushing. "Give my love to him. Now don't forget." "I will do it, certainly," said Kitty, simply, with a compassionate look. "So, Pryashi, Dolly, good-bye," said Anna, kissing her, and shaking hands with Kitty, she hastened away. "She is as fascinating as ever," remarked Kitty to her sister, when Dolly rejoined Kitty. "And how beautiful she is! But there is something very painful about her, terribly painful." "She doesn't seem to be in her usual state today. I thought she came near to bursting into tears when I accompanied her into the anteroom." Anna took her seat in her carriage in an even unhappier state of mind than she had been when she left her house. In addition to her former sufferings, she now felt the humiliation and sense of moral degeneracy which her meeting with Kitty had clearly made evident. "Where do you wish to go now? Home?" asked Pyotr. "Yes, home," she replied, not thinking at all where she was going. "They looked on me as some strange, incomprehensible curiosity. What can that man be saying so eagerly to the other?" she thought, seeing two passers-by talking together. "Is it possible to say what one really feels? I wanted to confess to Dolly, and I am glad that I kept still. How she would have rejoiced at my unhappiness! She would have tried to hide it, but at heart she would have been glad. She would have thought it just that I should be punished for that happiness which she begrudged me. And Kitty would have been still more pleased. How I read her through and through! She knows her husband liked me uncommonly well, and she is jealous, and hates me. And, what's more, she despises me. In her eyes I am an immoral woman. If I had been an immoral woman, I might have made him fall in love with me, if I had wanted to. I confess I thought of it. There goes a man who is delighted with his own looks, she said to herself, as a tall, florid man went by, and, mistaking her for an acquaintance, lifted his shiny hat from his shiny bald head, and instantly recognized his mistake. He thought he knew me. He knows me quite as well as anyone in the world knows me. I don't know myself. I only know my appetites, as the French say. They covet some of that bad ice cream, she said to herself, as she watched two little street children standing in front of a vendor who had just set down from his head a tub of ice cream, and was wiping his face with the corner of his coat. We all want our sweet delicacies, if not sugar plums, then bad ice creams, just like Kitty, who, not catching Vronsky, took Levin. She envies me, she hates me, and we all hate one another. I Kitty, and Kitty me. That is a fact. Tinkin confier. Je me fais confier par Tinkin. I will tell him this nonsense when he comes, thought she, and smiled, and then instantly remembered that there was no one now to whom she could tell amusing things. There's nothing amusing, nothing gay. It is all disgusting. The vesper bell is ringing, and the storekeeper is crossing himself so quickly that no one would think he was afraid of losing the chance. Why these churches, these bells, these lies? Just to hide the fact that we all hate one another, like those izvozchiks who are swearing at each other so angrily. Yashvin was right when he said, "He is after my shirt, and I am after his." That is a fact. She was so engrossed by these thoughts that she forgot her grief for a while, and was surprised when the carriage stopped in front of her house. The sight of the Swiss, coming to meet her, reminded her that she had sent a letter and a telegram. "Is there an answer yet?" "I will go and see," said the Swiss, and, looking on the secretary, he came back in a moment with a telegram in a thin, square envelope. Anna read, "I cannot be back before 10 o'clock. Vronsky." "And has the messenger come back?" "Not yet," replied the Swiss. "Ah, if that is so, then I know what I must do." And, feeling a vague sense of anger and a desire for vengeance arising in her soul, she ran upstairs. "I myself will go and find him," thought she. "Before I go away forever, I will tell him all. I never hated anyone as I hate this man." And when she caught sight of Vronsky's hat hanging on the peg, she shivered with aversion. She did not reflect that the dispatch was an answer to her telegram, and that he could not as yet have received her note. She imagined him now chatting gaily with his mother and the Princess Sorokin, without a thought of her suffering. "Yes, I must go as quickly as possible," she said, not knowing at all whither she should go. She felt that she must fly from the thoughts that oppressed her in this terrible house. The servants, the walls, the furniture, everything about it, filled her with disgust and pain, and crushed her with a terrible weight. "Yes, I must go to the railway station, and if not there, then somewhere else, to punish him." She looked at the timetable in the newspaper. The evening train went at 8:02. "Yes, I shall have plenty of time." She ordered the 2 other horses to be harnessed, and she had transferred from her trunk to her traveling bag things enough to last for several days. She knew that she should never come back again. She revolved 1,000 plans in her head, and determined that when she had done what she had in mind to do, either at the countess's country seat or at the station, she would go to the first city on the Nizhny Novgorod railway and stay there. Dinner was on the table. She went to it, smelt the bread and cheese, and persuading herself that the odor of the victuals was repugnant to her, she ordered the carriage again and went out. The house was already casting a shadow across the wide street, but the sky was clear and it was warm in the sun. Anushka, who brought her things, and Pyotr, who carried them to the carriage, and the coachman, who was evidently angry, all were disagreeable to her, and vexed her with their words and motions. "I do not need you, Pyotr." "Who will get your ticket?" "Well, go if you wish. It makes no difference to me," she said pettishly. Pyotr nimbly mounted the box, and, folding his arms, ordered the coachman to drive to the station. "Now I am myself again. Now I remember it all," said Anna to herself, as soon as the calash started, and rocking a little, rattled along over the cobblestones of the pavement, and once more her impressions began to go whirling through her mind. Yes, what was that good thing that I was thinking about last? Tuitkin? The coiffeur? Oh no, not that. Oh, yes, what Yashvin said about the struggle for existence, and hatred, the only thing that unites men. No, we go at haphazard. She saw in a carriage drawn by 4 horses a party of merrymakers who had evidently come to the city for a pleasure trip. "And the dog which you take with you does not help you at all. You can't get out of yourself." Glancing in the direction where Pyotr was turning, she saw a working man, almost dead drunk, who, with a flopping head, was being led by a policeman. She added, "That man's way is quicker. Count Vronsky and I did not reach this pleasure, though we expected much." And now for the first time Anna turned this bright light, all revealing, upon her relations with the count. Hitherto she had steadfastly refused to do so. What did he seek in me? A satisfaction for his vanity rather than for his love. She remembered Vronsky's words, and the expression of his face, which reminded her of a submissive dog, when they first met and loved. Everything seemed a confirmation of this thought. Yes, he cared for the triumph of success above everything. Of course, he loved me, but chiefly from vanity. Now that he is not proud of me any more, it is over. He is ashamed of me. He has taken from me all that he could take, and now I am of no use to him. I weigh upon him, and he does not want to be in dishonorable relationship with me. He said, yesterday, he wanted the divorce and to marry me so as to burn his ships. Perhaps he loves me still, but how? The zest is gone, she said in English. That man likes to show off, and he is mighty proud of himself, she added, as she looked at a ruddy-faced man riding by on a hired horse. There is nothing about me any longer to his taste. If I leave him, he will rejoice in the bottom of his heart. This was not mere hypothesis. She saw this clearly, in the penetrating light which now revealed to her the meaning of life and of her false relations. My love has been growing more and more passionate and selfish. His has been growing fainter and fainter. That is why we cannot get on together, she went on thinking. There can't be any help for it. He is all in all to me. I struggle to draw him closer and closer to me, and he wants to fly from me. Up to the time of our union, we flew to meet each other, but now we move irresistibly apart. This cannot be altered. He accuses me of being absurdly jealous, and I am. I confess that I am absurdly jealous, and yet I am not either. I am not jealous, but my love is no longer satisfied. But she opened her mouth to speak, and, in the excitement caused by the stress of her thoughts, she changed her place in the carriage. If I could only be something else than a passionate mistress, but I cannot, and I do not wish to be, and by this very wish I awake his dislike of me, while he stirs up all my evil passions, and this cannot be otherwise. Don't I know that he would not deceive me, that he is no longer in love with Kitty, that he has no intention of marrying Sorokina? I know it well, but it is none the easier for me. If now that he no longer loves me, he is kind, affectionate to me, merely from a sense of duty, but cannot be what I must have, then what would be 1,000 times worse than to have him angry with me? That would be hell. And so it is. He has long ceased to love me. When love ceases, hate begins. I don't know these streets at all. What hosts of houses! In them, people. No end of them. And they all hate one another. Well, let me think what could happen to me now that would give me happiness again. Suppose that Alexey Alexandrovitch should consent to the divorce, and would give me back Seroza, and that I should marry Vronsky. And as she thought of Alexey Alexandrovitch, Anna could see him with extraordinary vividness before her, as if alive, with his dull, lifeless, faded eyes, his white, blue-veined hands, and his cracking joints, and the intonations of his voice, and, as she recalled their relation to each other, which had been called love, she shuddered with aversion. Well, suppose I got the divorce, and were married to Vronsky, would not Kitty still look at me as she looked at me today? She certainly would. Would not Seroza ask and wonder why I had two husbands? But between me and Vronsky, what new feeling could I imagine? Is it possible that our relations might be, if not pleasanter, at least not so tormenting as they are now? No, and no, she replied without the least hesitation. Impossible. We are growing apart, and I make him unhappy. He makes me unhappy, and I cannot change him. Every means has been tried. The screw has been turned for the last time. Now there's a beggar with a child. She thinks she inspires pity. Were we not thrown into the world to hate one another, and to torment ourselves and everybody else? Here come the schoolboys out to play. Seroza? It reminded her of her son. I used to think that I loved him, and I was touched by his gentleness. I have lived without him. I have given him up for my love, and was not sorry for the change, as long as I was contented with him whom I loved. And she remembered with disgust what she called that love, and the clearness with which she now saw her own life, as well as the lives of others, delighted her. Thus am I, and Pyotr, and the coachman, Fyodor, and that merchant, and all people from here to the Volga, wherever these remarks are applicable, and everywhere and always, she thought, as the carriage stopped in front of the low-roofed station of the Nizhny Novgorod railway, and the porters came hurrying out to meet her. "Shall I book you for Oberyarlovka?" asked Pyotr. She had entirely forgotten why she had come, and only by a great effort could she understand what he meant. "Yes," said she, handing him her purse, and, taking her little red bag, she got out of the carriage. As she entered the waiting room for the first-class passengers with the throng, she reviewed all the details of her situation, and the plans between which she was halting. And again hope and despair in alteration irritated the wounds in her tortured, cruelly palpitating heart. As she sat on the stelliform divan waiting for the train, she looked with aversion on the people going and coming. They were all her enemies. And thought now of how, when she reached the station, she would write to him, and what she would write, and then how at this very moment he, not thinking of her suffering, was complaining to his mother of his position, and how she would go to his room, and what she would say to him. The thought that she might yet live happily crossed her brain, and how hard it was to love and hate him at the same time, and, above all, how frightfully her heart was beating. A bell sounded, and some impudent young men, ugly and vulgar, and yet mindful of the impression that they produced, hurried before her. Then Pyotr, in his livery and top-boots, with his dull, good-natured face, crossed the waiting-room, and came up to escort her to the carriage. The noisy men about the door stopped talking while she passed out on the platform. Then one of them whispered to his neighbor some remark which was apparently impudent. Anna mounted the high steps and sat down alone in the compartment on the dirty sofa which had once been white, and laid her bag beside her on the springy seat. Pyotr, at the window, raised his gold-laced hat, with an inane smile, for a farewell, and departed. The saucy conductor shut the door. A woman, deformed and ridiculously dressed up, followed by a little girl laughing affectedly, passed below the carriage window. Anna looked at her with disgust. "Katerina Andreyevna has everything, ma tante!" screamed the little girl. That child, even she is grotesque, and makes grimaces, thought Anna, and she seated herself at the opposite window of the empty apartment, to avoid seeing the people. A dirty hunchback muzhik passed close to the window, and examined the car wheels. He wore a cap, from beneath which could be seen tufts of dishevelled hair. "There is something familiar about that humpbacked muzhik," thought Anna, and suddenly she remembered her nightmare, and drew back, trembling with fright, toward the carriage door, which the conductor was just opening to admit a lady and a gentleman. "Do you want to get out?" Anna did not answer, and under her veil the conductor and the passenger did not see the horror in her face. She returned to her corner and sat down again. The couple took seats opposite her, and cast stealthy but curious glances at her gown. The husband and wife were obnoxious to her. The husband asked her if she objected to smoking. Evidently not for the sake of smoking, but as an excuse for entering into conversation with her. Having obtained her permission, he remarked to his wife in French that he felt even more inclined to talk than to smoke. They exchanged stupid remarks, with the hope of attracting Anna's attention. Anna clearly saw how they bored each other, how they hated each other. It was impossible not to hate such painful monstrosities. The second gong sounded, and was followed by the rumble of baggage, noise, shouts, laughter. Anna saw so clearly that there was nothing to rejoice at, that this laughter roused her indignation, and she longed to stop her ears so as not to hear it. At last the third signal was given. The locomotive whistled. There was a sound of escaping steam. The train started, and the gentleman crossed himself. It would be interesting to ask him what he meant by that, thought Anna, looking at him angrily. Then she looked past the woman's head, out of the car window, at the people apparently moving backward even while they were standing and walking on the platform. The carriage in which Anna sat moved past the stone walls of the station, the switches, the other carriages. The wheels with a ringing sound moved more easily and smoothly over the rails. The rays of the setting sun slanted into the car window, and a light breeze played through the slats of the blinds in the carriages, and Anna forgot her neighbors, breathed in the fresh air, and took up again the course of her thoughts. There, what was I thinking about? Oh, yes. I was just deciding that I could not imagine any situation in which my life could be anything but one long misery. We are all dedicated to unhappiness. We all know it, and only seek for ways to deceive ourselves. But when we see truth, what is to be done? Reason was given to man that he might avoid what annoys him, remarked the woman, in French, apparently delighted with her sentence, and putting out her tongue. The words fitted in with Anna's thought. To avoid what annoys him, she repeated, and a glance at the red-faced man and his thin companion showed her that the woman looked on herself as a misunderstood creature, and that her stout husband did not contradict this opinion, and took advantage of it to deceive her. Anna, as it were, read their history, and looked into the most secret depths of their hearts, but it was not interesting, and she went on with her reflections. Yes, it annoys me very much, and reason was given to avoid it. Therefore it must be done. Why not extinguish the light when it shines on things disgusting to see? But how? Why does the conductor keep hurrying through the car? Why do the young people in this carriage scream so loud? Why do they speak? What are they laughing at? It is all false, all a lie, all deception, all vanity and vexation. When the train reached the station, Anna went out with the other passengers and, with the idea of avoiding too rude a contact with the bustling crowd, she hesitated on the platform, trying to recollect why she had come, and what she meant to do. All that seemed to her possible before to do, now seemed to her difficult to execute, especially amid this noisy crowd, which would not leave her in peace. Now the porters came to her to offer her their services. Now some young men, clattering with their heels up and down the platform, and talking loud, observed her curiously, and now hurrying passengers pushed her aside. Finally, remembering that she was proposing to go farther if there was no answer from Vronsky, she stopped an official, and asked him if a coachman had been there with a letter for Count Vronsky. "Count Vronsky? Just now someone was here. Princess Sorokin and her daughter met him. What kind of a looking man is this coachman?" Even while she was talking with the official, the coachman, Mikhail, rosy and gay in his elegant blue livery and watch chain, immensely proud that he had fulfilled his commission so well, came to her and handed her a note. Anna broke the seal, and her heart stood still, even before she had read the carelessly written lines. "I am very sorry that your note did not find me in Moscow. I shall return at 10 o'clock." "Yes, that is what I expected," she said to herself, with an angry grimace. "Very good. You may go home," she said to Mikhail. She spoke the words slowly and gently, because the tumultuous beating of her heart almost prevented her from breathing. "No, I will not let you make me suffer so," thought she, addressing, with a threat, neither Vronsky nor her own self, so much as the thought that was torturing her. And she moved along the platform, past the station. 2 chambermaids walking on the platform turned to look at her, and made audible remarks about her toilet. "She has genuine lace," they said. The young men would not leave her in peace. They stared at her, and passed her again and again, joking and talking with loud voices. The station master came to her and asked if she was going to take the train. A lad selling kvass did not take his eyes from her. "Bozhe moi, where shall I go?" she said to herself, as she walked farther and farther along the platform. When she reached the end of it she stopped. Some women and children, who had come to the station to meet a man in spectacles, were talking and laughing. They too stopped talking, and turned to see Anna pass by. She hastened her steps, and reached the very limit of the platform. A freight train was coming. The platform shook, and made her feel as if she were on a moving train. Suddenly she remembered the man who was run over on the day when she met Vronsky for the first time, and she knew what was left for her to do. With light and swift steps she descended the stairway which led from the water tank at the end of the platform down to the rails, and stood very near the train, which was slowly passing by. She looked under the cars, at the chains and the brake, and at the high iron wheels of the first car, and she tried to estimate with her eye the distance between the fore and the back wheels, and the moment when the middle would be in front of her. "There," she said, looking at the shadow of the car thrown up on the black coal dust which covered the sleepers. "There, in the center. He will be punished, and I shall be delivered from it all, and from myself." She was going to throw herself under the first car as its center came opposite where she stood. Her little red traveling bag caused her to lose the moment. She could not detach it from her arm. She awaited the second. A feeling like that she had experienced once, just before taking a dive in the river, came over her, and she made the sign of the cross. This familiar gesture called back to her soul a whole series of memories of her youth and childhood, and suddenly the darkness which hid everything from her was torn asunder. Life, with its elusive joys, glowed for an instant before her. But she did not take her eyes from the car, and when the center, between the 2 wheels, appeared, she threw away her red bag, drawing her head between her shoulders, and, with outstretched hands, threw herself on her knees under the car. For a second she was horror-struck at what she was doing. "Where am I? What am I doing? Why?" She tried to get up, to draw back, but something monstrous, inflexible struck her head and threw her on her back. "Lord, forgive me all," she murmured, feeling the struggle to be in vain. A little music was working on the railroad, mumbling in his beard. And the candle, by which she had read the book that was filled with fears, with deceptions, with anguish, and with evil, flared up with greater brightness than she had ever known, revealing to her all that was before in darkness, then flickered, grew faint, and went out forever. Almost 2 months had passed by. Half the hot summer was gone, but Sergey Ivanovitch had only just made up his mind to leave Moscow. An important event for him had just occurred. The year before he had finished his book entitled An essay on the principles and forms of government in Europe and in Russia, the fruit of 6 years of labor. The introduction, as well as some fragments from the book, had already appeared in the reviews, and certain parts had been read by the author to the people of his circle, so that the ideas contained in this treatise could not be a perfect novelty for the public. But nevertheless Sergey Ivanovitch expected that the book on its appearance would attract serious attention, and produce, if not a revolution in science, at least a powerful sensation in the learned world. This book, after careful revision, had been published the year before, and distributed among the booksellers. Though Sergey Ivanovitch answered reluctantly and with pretended indifference the questions of his friends who asked how the book was going, and though he refrained from inquiring of the booksellers how it was selling, nevertheless he followed eagerly and with strained attention every sign of the impression which his book was producing on society and literature. But a week passed, a second, a third, and there was not a sign of any impression. His friends, specialists and savants, evidently out of politeness, spoke to him about it, but the rest of his acquaintances, not being interested in a book of scientific purport, did not speak about it at all. Society, also, which just at that time was preoccupied with entirely different matters, showed utter unconcern. In literary circles, also, during the lapse of a month, there was not a word about his book. Sergey Ivanovitch carefully calculated the time necessary for preparing critical reviews, but months passed by, and there also was absolute silence. Only in the Northern Beetle, in a facetious feuilleton regarding the singer Drabanti, who had lost his voice, a few scornful words were said in regard to Kozneushev's book, showing that it had already been criticized by all and was given over to universal ridicule. At length, after 3 months, a critical article appeared in a journal of importance. Sergey Ivanovitch knew who the author was. He had met him once at Golubtsov's. He was a very young and feeble critic, very clever as a writer, but perfectly uneducated, and cowardly in his private relations. Notwithstanding Sergey Ivanovitch's contempt of the author, he began to read the article with extraordinary interest. It proved to be abominable. Evidently the critic understood the whole book just exactly as he should not have understood it, but he had so cleverly put together a section of extracts that for those who had not read the book, and apparently almost no one had read it, it was perfectly clear that the entire book, in spite of its high pretensions, was nothing but a tissue of pompous phrases, and these not always intelligible, as the critic's frequent interrogation points testified, and that the author of the work was a perfect ignoramus. And it was done in such a witty way that Sergey Ivanovitch himself could not deny the wit of it. But, after all, it was abominable. Sergey Ivanovitch, in spite of the unusual conscientiousness with which he examined into the justice of these remarks, did not for a moment think of answering the ridiculous errors and blunders. But he could not help instantly remembering all the least details of his meeting and conversation with the author of the article. "Did I say anything to affront him?" said Sergey Ivanovitch. And remembering how, when he met the young author of the article, he had shown up his ignorance in conversation, he, therefore, understood the animus of the criticism. The appearance of this article was followed by a silence, unbroken by either voice or journal, and Sergey Ivanovitch saw that his 6 years' labor, into which he had put so much of his heart and soul, had been wasted. And his position was made all the more trying because, now that his book was off his hands, he had nothing especial to occupy the larger part of his time. He was bright, well educated, in perfect health, and very active, and he did not know how to employ his industry. Conversations with callers, visits to the club, and the meetings of committees, where there was a chance for him to talk, took some of his time. But he, a man long wonted to life in the city, did not permit himself to talk with every one, as his inexperienced brother did when he was in Moscow, so that he had much leisure and a superfluity of intellectual energy. To his joy, just at this time, which was so trying to him because of the failure of his book, and after his interest in dissenters, American subjects, the famine in Samara, expositions, spiritualism, was exhausted, The Slavic question began to engross public attention, and Sergey Ivanovitch, who had been one of its earliest advocates, gave himself up to it with enthusiasm. Among Sergey Ivanovitch's friends nothing else was thought about or talked about except the Serbian war. All the things that lazy people are accustomed to do was done for the help of these brother Slavs. Balls, concerts, dinners, matches, ladies' finery, beer, drinking saloons, everything bore witness of sympathy for the Slavs. With much that was said and written on this subject, Sergey Ivanovitch could not agree. He saw that the Slav question was one of those fashionable movements that always carry people to extremes. He saw that many people with very petty personal ends in view took part in it. He recognized that the newspapers made many useless and exaggerated statements, in order to attract attention to themselves and belittle their rivals. He saw that in this common impulse of society, upstarts put themselves forward and outdid one another in making a noise. Commanders-in-chief without an army, ministers without a ministry, journalists without a journal, party leaders without partisans. He saw much that was childish and absurd. But he also saw and admired the enthusiasm which united all classes, and which it was impossible not to share. The massacre of the Serbians, who professed the same faith and spoke almost the same language, aroused sympathy for their sufferings and indignation against their persecutors. And the heroism of the Serbs and Montenegrins, who were fighting for a great cause, aroused a universal desire to help their brethren, not only in word, but in deed. But there was another phenomenon which delighted Sergey Ivanovitch especially. This was the manifestation of public opinion. Society actually spoke out its desires. The national soul received expression, as Sergey Ivanovitch expressed it, and the more he studied this movement as a whole, the more evidently it seemed to him that it was destined to grow to enormous proportions and to constitute an epoch. He devoted himself to the service of this great cause, and forgot to think about his book. All his time was now so occupied that he could scarcely reply to the letters and demands made upon him. He had worked all the spring and a part of the summer, and only in the month of July could he tear himself away to go to his brother in the country. He went for a fortnight's vacation, and rejoiced to find even in the depths of the country, in the very holy of holies of the peasantry, the same awakening of the national spirit in which he himself and all the inhabitants of the capital and the large cities of the empire firmly believed. Katavasov seized the opportunity to fulfill a promise he had made to visit Levin, and the two friends left town together. Sergey Ivanovitch and Katavasov had just reached the station of the Kursk railway, which was especially crowded that day, and, leaving their carriage, they were looking at a lackey who had followed them laden with various articles, when 4 cabs filled with volunteers also drove up. Ladies carrying bouquets met them, and accompanied by a crowd, they entered the station. One of the ladies who had come to meet the volunteers came out of the waiting room and addressed Sergey Ivanovitch. "Did you also come to see them off?" she asked, speaking in French. "No, I am going myself, Princess, to have a little rest at my brother's. But are you still on escort duty?" he added, with a scarcely perceptible smile of amusement. "I have to be," replied the princess. "But tell me, is it true that we have sent off 800 already? Malvinsky told me so." "More than 800. We've sent off more than 1,000, if we could count those not immediately from Moscow," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "There, I said so!" cried the lady, delighted. "And is it true that the subscriptions amount to nearly 1,000,000? "More than that, Princess." "Have you read the news? They have beaten the Turks again." "Yes, I read about it," replied Sergey Ivanovitch. She referred to a recent dispatch, which confirmed the report that 3 days before the Turks had been beaten at every point and had fled, and that the next day a decisive battle was expected. "Oh, by the way, do you know a splendid young fellow is petitioning to go? I don't see why they put obstacles in his way. I wanted to ask you to put your signature on his petition. I know him. He comes from the Countess Lidia Ivanovna." After asking some particulars in regard to the young man, Sergey Ivanovitch went into the waiting room, affixed his signature to the document, and handed it back to the princess. "Do you know, Count Vronsky, The famous is going on this train?" said the princess, with a triumphant and significant smile, as he rejoined her and handed her the petition. "I heard that he was going, but I did not know when. On this train?" "I just saw him. He is here. His mother is the only one with him. All things considered, I do not think he could do any better." "Oh, yes, of course." During the conversation the crowd had rushed into the restaurant of the station, where a man with a glass in his hand was making an address to the volunteers. "For the service of our faith and humanity and our brethren," he said, raising his voice, "Matushka Moskva, Mother Moscow, gives you her blessing in this noble cause. May it prosper," he concluded, with tears in his eyes. The crowd responded with cheers, and a fresh throng poured into the waiting room, nearly overwhelming the princess. "Ah, princess, what do you say to this?" cried Stepan Arkadyevitch, who, with a radiant smile of joy, suddenly appeared in the midst of the throng. "Didn't he speak gloriously? Bravo! And here's Sergey Ivanovitch. You ought to speak just a few words, you know, of encouragement. You do it so well," added Oblonsky, touching Koznishev's arm with an expression of suave, flattering deference. "Oh, no, I am leaving immediately." "Where?" "To the country, to my brother's," replied Sergey Ivanovitch. "Then you'll see my wife. I've written her, but you'll see her before she gets my letter. Please tell her that you met me, and that everything is 'all right.' She will understand. And be so good as to tell her, too, that I got my place as a member of the commission of, well, she knows what that is. You know, les petites misères de la vie humaine," said he, turning to the princess, as if in apology. "My Kaya, not Lisa, but Bipshy, sends 1,000 guns and 12 hospital nurses. Did I tell you?" "Yes, I heard about it," answered Koznishев coldly. "But what a pity you are going away," replied Stepan Arkadyevitch. "We give a farewell dinner tomorrow to 2 volunteers, at Dimer's. Bartnietsky of Petersburg and our Veslovsky, Grisha. Both are going. Veslovsky is just married. He is a fine lad. Isn't it so, princess?" he added, addressing the lady. The princess did not reply, but looked at Koznishев. The fact that the princess and Sergey Ivanovitch evidently wanted to get rid of him did not in the least disconcert Stepan Arkadyevitch. Smiling, he glanced now at the princess's hat plume, now off to one side or the other, as if searching for a new subject, and, as he saw a lady going by with a subscription box, he beckoned to her and handed her a 5-ruble note. "I can't bear to see the subscription boxes pass by me, now that I have ready money," he said. "What splendid news there is! Hurrah for the Montenegrins!" "What is that you say?" he cried, when the princess told him that Vronsky was going by the first train. For an instant Stepan Arkadyevitch's face grew sad, but the next moment, slightly limping with both feet, and stroking his side whiskers, he went off to the room where Vronsky was. He had already entirely forgotten the tears he had shed over his sister's grave, and saw in Vronsky only a hero and an old friend. "One must do him justice, in spite of his faults," said the princess to Sergey Ivanovitch, when Oblonsky was gone. "He has the true Russian, the Slavic nature. But I am afraid it will be disagreeable to the count to see him. Whatever people may say, I pity that unhappy man. Try to talk with him a little on the journey," said the princess. "Certainly, if I have a chance." "I never liked him, but what he is doing now makes up for much. He's not only going himself, but he's taking out a squadron of cavalry at his own expense." "Yes, so I have heard." The bell rang, and the crowd pressed toward the doors. "There he is," said the princess, pointing out Vronsky, who was dressed in a long coat and broad-brimmed black hat. His mother was leaning on his arm. Oblonsky followed them, talking vivaciously. Vronsky was frowning and looked straight ahead, as if not listening to what Stepan Arkadyevitch said. Apparently at Oblonsky's suggestion he looked in the direction where Sergey Ivanovitch and the princess were standing, and raised his hat silently. His face, which had grown old and worn, was like stone. Going out on the platform, Vronsky, silently quitting his mother's side, vanished from sight in his compartment. On the platform men were singing the national hymn. Then hurrahs and vivas resounded. One of the volunteers, a tall, a very young man, with stooping shoulders, ostentatiously responded to the public, waving above his head a felt hat and a bouquet, while behind him 2 officers and an elderly man with a full beard and a greasy cap put out their heads, also bowing. After Sergey Ivanovitch had taken leave of the princess, he and Katavasov, who had joined him, entered their carriage, which was packed, and the train started. When the train rolled into the station at Tsarist Russia, it was met by a chorus of young men singing the Slavsa. Again the volunteers put out their heads and bowed, but Sergey Ivanovitch paid no attention to them. He had had so much to do with volunteers that he already knew this general type, and it did not interest him. But Katavasov, who on account of his pedagogical occupations had not enjoyed any opportunity to observe the men who volunteered, was very much interested, and asked his friend about them. Sergey Ivanovitch advised him to look into their carriage and talk with some of them. At the next station Katavasov followed this advice. As soon as the train stopped, he went into the second-class carriage and made the acquaintance of the volunteers. Some of them were seated in a corner of the carriage, talking noisily, aware that they were attracting the attention of the other passengers and of Katavasov, whom they saw come in. The tall, sunken-chested young man was talking louder than the others. He was evidently tipsy, and was telling the story of something which had happened in their establishment. Opposite him sat an old officer in the Austrian military jacket of the Guard uniform. He was listening with a smile to the narrator, and occasionally prompting him. A third volunteer, in an artillery uniform, was sitting on a box near them. A fourth was asleep. Katavasov entered into conversation with the youth, and learned that he had been a rich merchant in Moscow, who, before he was 22 years old, had succeeded in squandering a considerable fortune. Katavasov did not like him, because he was effeminate, conceited, and sickly. He evidently felt, especially now that he was drunk, that he was doing a heroic deed, and he boasted in the most disagreeable manner. The second, a retired officer, also impressed Katavasov unpleasantly. He was a man who had apparently tried his hand at everything. He had worked on a railway, and had been director of an estate, and had established a factory, and he talked of everything without any necessity of doing so, and often used words which showed his ignorance. The third, the artilleryman, on the contrary, pleased Katavasov very much. He was a modest gentleman. He was evidently disgusted by the affected knowledge of the retired officer and the young merchant's boasted heroism, and he would say nothing about himself. When Katavasov asked him what induced him to go into Serbia, he answered modestly, "I am going because everyone else is going. We must help the Serbians. It is too bad." "They have very few of our artillerymen, I believe." "My service in the artillery was very short. I may be assigned to the infantry or the cavalry." "Why in the infantry, when they need artillerymen more than all?" asked Katavasov, gathering from the artillerist's age that he must have already reached a considerable rank. "I did not serve very long in the artillery, but left the service when I was only a yunker." And he began to explain why he had not passed his examination. All this together produced on Katavasov a generally unpleasant impression, and when the volunteers rushed out into one of the stations to get something to drink, Katavasov felt the desire to talk with someone so as to confirm his unfavorable impression. One of his fellow travelers, a little old man in a military paletot, had been listening all the time to Katavasov's talk with the volunteers. As the two were left alone together in the carriage, Katavasov addressed him. "What a diversity of condition of all these men that are going south," said Katavasov, vaguely, wishing to express his opinion and at the same time draw out the old man's views. The old man was a soldier who had fought in 2 campaigns, and he knew what it meant to go to war. And in the actions and words of these gentlemen, the bravery with which they kept applying themselves to the flask, he read their inferiority as soldiers. Moreover, his residence was in a district city, and he wanted to relate how from that place a good-for-nothing fellow, a drunkard and a thief whom no one would hire as a workman, had gone as a soldier. But knowing by experience that in the present state of excitement under which society was laboring, it was dangerous to express himself frankly against the general sentiment, and especially to criticize the volunteers, He merely looked at Katavasov. "Well, men are needed there," said he, smiling with his eyes. And they began to talk over the latest war news, and each of them concealed from the other his doubt whether a battle was to be expected on the next day, since, according to the latest report, the Turks had been defeated at all points. And so they parted without either of them having expressed what he really thought. When Katavasov returned to his own carriage, he told Sergey Ivanovitch, with some twinges of conscience, that he enjoyed talking with the volunteers, and he declared that they were excellent lads. In the great station where they next stopped, the chorus, the cheers, the bouquets, and the beggars again appeared, and again the ladies with bouquets conducted the volunteers into the restaurant, but there was so much less enthusiasm than there had been at Moscow. While the train stopped at a certain government capital, Sergey Ivanovitch did not go to the restaurant, but walked up and down the platform. The first time he passed Vronsky's compartment, he noticed that the window was shaded. But, when he passed the second time, he saw the old countess at the window. She called him to her. "You see, I am going as far as Kursk with him." "Yes, I heard that he was going," answered Kozneushchev, stopping at the window and looking in. "What a noble action on his part," he added, seeing that Vronsky was not in the carriage. "Well, what could he do after his misfortune?" "What a horrible thing it was," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "Ach, what I have not been through! Yes, do come in. Ach, what I have not been through!" she repeated, as Sergey Ivanovitch came in and sat down on the seat beside her. "You could not imagine it. For 6 weeks he never said a word to anyone, and he only ate when I begged him to do so. We dared not leave him alone a single instant. We took away everything with which he might kill himself with. We lived on the first floor, but we had to be on the watch all the same. You know he shot himself once before, for her sake," said the old countess, her face clouding at this remembrance. "Yes, she died as was fit for such a woman to die. Even the death she chose was low and wretched." "It is not for us to judge her, countess," replied Sergey Ivanovitch with a sigh. "But I can imagine what you have suffered." "Ah, don't speak of it. My son was with me at my country place. A note was brought him. He answered immediately. We did not know at all that she was at the station. That evening I had just gone to my room, and my Mary told me that a lady had thrown herself under the train. I felt something like a shock. I understood instantly what had happened. I knew it was she. My first words were, 'Let no one tell the count.' But they had just told him. His coachman was at the station when it happened, and saw it all. I ran to my son's room. He was beside himself. It was terrible to see him. Without speaking one word, he left the house. And what he found, I do not know. But they brought him back like one dead. I should never have known him. Prostration complete, the doctor said. Then he became almost insane. Ugh, what can be said?" cried the countess, waving her hands. "It was a terrible time. No, let people say what they will. She was a bad woman. Think, what a desperate passion she was in. She did it to make an extraordinary sensation, and she succeeded. She has done irreparable injury to the lives of 2 men of rare merit, her husband and my son, and ruined herself." "How about her husband?" "He has taken her little girl. At first Alyosha consented to everything. Now he is awfully sorry, having given up his daughter to a stranger, but he could not take back his word. Karenina went to the funeral. We succeeded in preventing a meeting between him and Alyosha. For him, that is her husband, this death is a deliverance. But my poor son gave up everything for her, sacrificed everything. Me, his position, his career. And she was not contented with that, but wanted to ruin him besides. No, whatever you may say, her death is the death of a bad woman, a woman without religion. May God forgive me, but when I think of the harm she has done my son, I cannot help cursing her memory." "How is he now?" "This Serbian war is our salvation. I am old and don't understand much about it, but God sent it for him. Of course, for me, as his mother, it is painful. And besides, they say, ce n'est pas très bien vu à Petersburg. But what can be done about it? This is the only thing that could save him. Yashvin, his friend, gambled away all he had and enlisted. He came to Alyosha and persuaded him to go to Serbia with him. Now this is occupying him. Do talk with him, I beg of you. He is so sad. And then, besides his other troubles, he has a toothache. But he will be glad to see you. Please talk with him. He is walking up and down on the other side of the track." Sergey Ivanovitch said that he would be very glad to talk with the count, and went over to the side where Vronsky was.